A very warm welcome to the podcast of the World Wind Energy Association, the World of Wind Power. My name is Stefan Gsänger, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 13th episode, which will be about one of the Nordic countries in Europe, about Sweden, one of the renewable energy champions in Europe, and one of the leaders also in a global perspective. And it's my great pleasure that I can welcome a guest who can be more knowledgeable about wind power development in Sweden than Per Olofsson, who is the chairman of the Swedish Wind Power Association. A warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and nice to see that you mentioned champion in your introduction. It's great to hear. We sometimes feel like champions, that's for sure.
Well, we speak about it soon in detail, why I believe, yeah, there is some justification. Of course, there are probably also some developments which you may not be happy about, but let's talk about this in detail. But before that, maybe you can introduce yourself. I know you are a voluntary president of the association, but how are you personally involved in wind power?
Yeah, that goes way back to 2008. Let's say one of my drivers in life is that always been interested in technology, and in the early years worked quite a lot with early mobile phones, computer servers, Microsoft infrastructure, firewalls, technical stuff, and during that business journey, I was headhunted to a wind power company to be their CIO. It was a small company. It was called Svevind, and I was employee number 2 in Sweden. So to be the chief of IT in such small company was quite interesting. And in the first year, the management team was recruited. So we the core business, so to say, started back then in 2008. So my job there was, so to say, to create the necessary infrastructure around the company in order to project manage and seek environmental permits for renewables and especially wind power. So I had the opportunity and the possibility to go into technical details of certain areas connected to wind power. For example, I installed and operated wind measurement masts. In the first year, we constructed as far as we know, the world's first 150-meter wind measurement tower, fully equipped with all special sensors, and it was a historic event to have a helicopter to lift that mast. And we constructed in that year, I think it was 3 different wind measurement masts in an area in pretty much the cold north of Sweden. So that was one of the technical ways into wind power, measuring wind.
So your company is developing, operating also wind farms. That's your kind of professional job.
Yes, and to continue on that story, so to say, first we measured wind. We found perfect sites for wind power, and we found a perfect area for wind power that's called Markbygden in North Sweden, and we found a site where we could install 4,000 megawatt of wind without any big conflicts of interest. So we found an area that was a wind resource of 10 to 12 terawatt hours. So in this small company of 6-7 employees, we developed that, and that during that time period, we also founded a company to operate the turbines that we later on built. So what you see here in the picture is a pilot project within Markbygden called Dragaliden. That was the first 2 Enercon E82 turbines in the area. And we had pretty cool inauguration there back in time in 2008. And we continued on that journey, and today there's more than 500 turbines existing in this area.
Oh, that's impressive. And the 4
So,
gigawatt.
so, so that's pretty cool. And what you see on the screen here, W3 Energy, is
Mhm.
a company that I founded within Svevind, the organization, and I did a management buyout of that company in 2009 in order to form an independent asset manager for renewables, mainly in the Nordics.
Mhm.
So we are focused on cold climate operations of mid and large scale wind farms. So I'm keeping the technical perspective here. So I really like to understand how turbines work and why they are working good or not so good in cold climates, and what's possible to do to improve the performance. So performance optimization has been one of the topics that I and my colleagues and our company have worked with.
That sounds very exciting. And when I hear 4 gigawatt for one company, that is really big, considering that the number of people living in Sweden is not so big. But how that fits into the Swedish electricity supply, let's go back to that a bit later. You are here also as the president or chairman of the
Chairman.
Swedish chairman. Okay, I'll call you chairman, Mr. Chairman of the
Fine.
Swedish Wind Energy Association, which is a member of the World Wind Energy Association, and which is an organization that is, yeah, kind of lobbying for wind power regulations. What's the role of, I think the Swedish abbreviation would be SWIFT, Swedish Wind Power Association.
Yeah, Swedish Wind Power Association. It's an association that's almost 40 years old. The association is consisting of small, mid-sized, and large-scale owners of wind farms and wind turbines in Sweden. And we are an organization that is very much focused of the topic of operation of a wind farm in the, let's say, 20, 30, 40-year perspective. So we are looking quite a lot on the technical perspective, but we're also working a lot with the perspective of you as a wind farm owner to have an environment of doing business and operating wind farms which fits you as a company, as a company owner, so to say. The politics shouldn't interfere too much with operations. The politics should make possibilities to bring more renewables to the system, and
Mm.
we have pretty much all types of wind power producers within our organization.
Mhm. I think that's an important topic that as we also on the global level try to be inclusive because the range of players in this industry is really, really big. You have farmers who own maybe a single wind turbine up to the
Yeah.
utilities who have indeed gigawatt portfolio. Now, when we look at the Swedish wind power market today, you know that we are gathering every year the annual wind power statistics, and the last couple of years, we've always been impressed by the uh, installed added capacity in Sweden,
Yeah.
which used to be one of the highest, number one, number two, number three in Europe, which again, compared to population of, I think it's around 10 million, compared
Yeah.
to countries like Germany, more than 80 million, France, 60, 70 million, Italy, topped that in some countries.
Yeah.
So, how can you, would you like to briefly explain the history of wind power? When did that development start? And I also remember that I heard that Sweden was not only one of the first to invest in wind power, but also played a role in developing the technology. When did that start?
Yeah, well, looking back into my organization, Swedish Wind Power Association, looking back into that history, we had the early adopters of renewable energy,
Mm,
farmers, technology enthusiasts who saw the potential of wind power, a clean energy source, and I would assume that the interest for the clean energy source started when we had the oil crisis in the 70s. So
mm,
we had to look for alternatives to oil. And let's say back then, it would be the best thing to do if you would need electricity for your big farm. You would build a wind turbine. If you would need electricity on an island where you have your house or your operation, you could use wind energy. And with that in mind, since there were quite a lot of farmers who installed wind power in the early days, it was also natural to have the connection to Vestas because they were a supplier of farm equipment, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
connected to silos, for example. And there was there was a connection there, and they could have a dialogue and okay, let's put a generator on top of this thing and then start producing wind energy. Quite simple as that. And looking at the early days of wind power in Sweden, it was not just on land, but it was also on sea. So there are some really early adopters, and I have one of the early adopters, Mr. Andreas Wickman, in the board of Swedish Wind Power Association, and he was one of the key players in developing both onshore and also did the first project offshore or near shore. And looking on that, the development onshore has been gigantic in Sweden. But on the other hand, the development of offshore in Sweden has been more or less zero to none compared to onshore.
Mm-hmm.
And moving a little bit forward, there were also incentives or engagement in order to have construction of wind turbines in Sweden. And if I'm not mistaken, it was connected to ABB in the late 70s,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
that was later, closed. But it has been said that they had like 2 megawatt or 3 megawatt prototypes already in the early 80s.
So one thing what you've already mentioned is you mentioned one of the Danish, let's say, companies. As far as I know, it was a blacksmith company, and of course we've have a lot also collaboration with our Danish colleagues.
Yes.
So that means that from the beginning there's been some, at least in the Nordic countries, collaboration between Swedish, Danish companies. You mentioned also ABB. That story, I think, if you can find also in other countries like Germany, were also
Yeah.
like some of
Yeah.
the big companies that started at that time. Now, what is today the share of wind power? How far have you come in Sweden? What's the percentage and what's the installed capacity?
Well, looking at, I think in order to describe that, I would like to go back in history into 2008 when I started in the wind business. The annual output of wind energy in Sweden was approximately 1 to 1.2 terawatt hour on an annual basis. Looking at 2024, the outlook, which is 2024 is soon to come to an end. The outlook is almost 43 terawatt hour on an annual basis, on a running 12 months basis, which is impressive increase in renewable wind since 2008. And I also like to mention that looking at solar, I think solar now is reaching almost 3 terawatt hours in Sweden. And it's quite interesting to see that development is as well. It is important. All in all, wind and solar together is very close to producing more annual output than nuclear in Sweden.
What's the percentage in the electricity consumption that wind energy covers now?
Nuclear is somewhere around 50, between 50 and 60 terawatt hour annually. And the outlook for 2026 in Sweden is 55 terawatt hour of wind.
So it will be then on equal like nuclear power.
Yeah.
We come back to that also, I mean, when we talk about what's the current kind of politics in that sense, you've already mentioned that offshore wind plays a role. So you said that at the moment it's 43 terawatt, or this year you expect 43 terawatt hours from wind. I assume that is onshore and offshore, but you also have some offshore wind. What's kind of the share of that?
Or I have to dig so deep for figures, because looking at offshore, it's so little, so
Mm.
few projects in operation. So it's might not even be worth to mention, because it's really just a small bit of wind.
So
Um,
it's the majority. I mean, Sweden is land-wise is a very big country. You have a lot of space.
yeah,
Which parts of Sweden are on most of this? You mentioned that the project, the 4 gigawatt project, you you've been working on,
yep.
that's in the north of Sweden. So how is kind of the wind power landscape? Is most of the wind farms, can they be found in the north? And I
Well,
think the population is more in the south, huh? Southern coast.
I think there are historical reasons, and also technological reasons why wind power is mainly installed in areas where they are right now. You need to understand that Sweden is split into four price areas.
Mm,
Price area 4 is South Sweden. Price area 3, let's say South to mid Sweden. Price area 2 is enormous, let's say mid Sweden to mid North Sweden. And price area 1 is really North Sweden. So what you have in my background here is price area 1.
mhm,
Um, Most of the hydrogen being produced in Sweden is installed in price area 2.
mhm,
Most of the grid capacity available is in price area 2.
mhm,
The interconnection between price area 2 and 3 is, so to say, where the most capacity flows, and the most capacity is needed as of now in price area 3. In
mhm,
terms of installed wind power in Sweden, most of it by far is in price area 2.
mhm.
So it's really uh, looking at figures would say the amount of wind energy would be in few years time, that it will be the double amount in price area 2 compared to price area 3. So the outlook is that the most construction and the most being put into operation in the coming few years is in price area 2 and 3.
Now, before we maybe talk about these price areas, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
What's the total capacity? We haven't talked about that. How many gigawatt do you now have in Sweden?
Uh, 17.2
17
by the end of 2024.
gigawatt. That's
And
again, I mean, people who are not familiar with the kind of the size compared to other countries may not understand that fully, but I think that is probably worldwide a very, very high share per capita.
yeah,
Um,
it is really high. And looking at the outlook to 2026, expectation is 19.5 gigawatt. And so to say, that is um, the expectation with contracted turbines, so to say. It could still be higher than that.
okay, wow.
Um,
Now,
so,
you
so
talked about these price areas. And I think that's something very interesting because I believe that we can be even more successful with wind and renewables in general if we can make sure that the people benefit. And I think the best argument is renewables are cheap, but that is not everywhere reaching the people. That's
yeah.
why I'm interested in hearing about these price areas. Um, what does it mean for the consumers? And does it mean that in that areas where you have more wind power, people have some benefits in a way of lower power prices?
Definitely. Let's say from a producer's point of view, the price areas, when you're in price area 1, the income is of course much less. But from a consumer point of view,
Mhm,
and from an industrial point of view, the price areas means that price areas that has a lot of production in general has a lower price. And what, so to say, limits the price increase or the price fluctuation is the uh, exportation capability. let's say if you have lots of grid capacity to export from a price area to another price area, the price in general will be a little bit higher. And looking at recent years, North Sweden has supplied a lot of renewable energy to Finland. Finland had a long construction time of adding nuclear power. If I'm not mistaken, it took 10, 12 years to install the latest reactor. And during that time period, more or less North Sweden has exported green wind to Finland to fill the gap.
It exceeded even. I think they wanted to finalize complete Olkiluoto in 2009, and at the end it became 23. So it was
Yeah, so
14 years. It's not the construction time, but the overrun. So you
overall,
benefited from that. That's an interesting part of the story as well.
even worse. So I'm looking quite often at the capacity flows from the TSO, Svenska kraftnät, and we can easily see the capacity flows going from Sweden to Finland. That has been the direction for the last years, really.
But it's very interesting because now the reference year for Olkiluoto was 2009, which was supposed to be the completion year.
Yeah.
And you referred that the year before, Sweden had 1 terawatt hour of wind generation, and now it's 43. So in that period where there was nothing happening, no generation, you kind of increased, like, I mean, it was a 40 times increase of wind power generation.
Yeah, exactly. And during the last, I think it's the last 2 years, Sweden has been the biggest net exporter of renewables to Europe.
Yeah, I know also in Central Europe we're getting sometimes, and
Yeah.
it's not as some say it's nuclear power from France, but the primary sources are imported wind power from Sweden and from Denmark, indeed, when you talk about Germany.
Definitely.
Now you talked about the investors, the operators who say they may not be the first beneficiaries of the sometimes low power prices, but who are those investors in Sweden? Which kind of companies? You mentioned that already there's a big range from
It,
farmers.
it's a huge range, I would say. Well, in the early days, if it was farmers and different businesses who invested, nowadays we have a complete spectrum of investors. Right now we have the traditional pension funds, we have utilities. The utilities have quite long time, take quite some time before they invest, but when they do, they do it with full force. And we also have the industry. Different industry sectors are investing in renewables for their own consumption. We see industry sectors such as the forest industry. The forest industry owns enormous properties, enormous amount of land, and they're often land lease givers to different wind power project developers. They are now investing in their own wind power. And we have these new coming energy consumers of gigascale. Let's look at green steel, for example. There are two different actors, two different enterprises in Sweden that are really large scale green steel providers, and they are in the construction phase as of now, and they will produce the green steel with hydrogen. So they need enormous amount of, let's say, affordable or price efficient renewables. And they are driving the need for more renewables in North Sweden because they see that the biggest benefit of having their industry establishment is to put it in North Sweden. We have clean energy, we have the grid capacity needed, and we have the raw material sources as well. And the ports are available for transporting the green steel out to Europe and all over the world.
That sounds very promising and actually too good to be true.
Yeah,
That actually there is obviously now there are natural drivers, industrial economic drivers. You have enough resources. I think there is no doubt about that. There must
sure.
also be some challenges. I'm sure there must be some. What are the challenges that kind of may still lead to a little bit maybe slower than possible, or are there no problems at all?
Well, I think the permitting process and the political landscape.
Mhm.
The political landscape right now is uh, talking a lot about negative news for renewables, for wind power. There's a lot of discussion ongoing about nuclear, and what you're missing in that political discussion is the time perspective. The
Mhm.
industry is longing for, they need green electricity in the next 10 years. And the politicians say, we will solve that by installing nuclear power in 15 years. And
Which at
that
the end will
doesn't
take
fit.
20 to 25 years. Huh?
Exactly. And we in the wind industry say, okay, it's not a problem. We can install green wind energy. It's possible to deliver that in the 10, 15 years where you, the
Mhm.
industry, need that capacity. So the political landscape here needs to make sure that there are possibilities and that doors are kept open for more wind power. And as it has been until just recently, all of the local municipalities have more or less said no to permitting or to allow companies to apply for a permitting process.
Mhm.
The municipalities has a veto. They need to give a thumbs up in order for the wind power developer to continue their environmental process.
That's interesting. I know that you have, of course, in the national government now, you have also some really of these that we have now all over Europe. Very right-wing parties is somehow indirectly involved. But you said that that veto that comes from the local level. Now,
Yeah,
on the local level, how can you bypass that? We are at the
you,
moment on the global level discussing how we can optimize the benefits for exactly this local level. What's your approach? How can you convince the mayors and the town councillors uh, to to agree to wind farm development?
there was a public consultation regarding this topic,
Mm,
and it's called Value of Wind, and
mm,
that investigation presented actions that for the politicians to engage in and to make sure it would be easier or quicker for more wind to be added to the national system. And one of the suggestions from this was to take the property tax. The wind turbines you see here, they pay a property tax. That
mm,
property tax goes to the state. And
mm,
now the national politics has decided that they're going to propose to give that property tax to the local municipalities.
okay.
So all wind property tax can be transferred to each local municipality, and that has a huge impact. In the municipality of Piteå, where these wind turbines are located, since they are the municipality with most wind in Sweden, they are expecting something in between 40 to 50 million Swedish krona, which is probably 3
Four
million
to
euro.
5 million euros, no?
Yeah, something like that,
Mm.
which
Five to
is
six
huge
million euro.
amount.
Mm,
And now the local municipalities has an incentive to use their veto to say yes, because they know if this is approved, we will benefit locally by
mm,
receiving this property tax. However, the decision or the suggestion right now is only to take a decision on the coming 3 years of property tax. but the politicians need to find a more long-term solution so the municipalities can see that this is coming on an annual basis for a long time period. And we in the wind energy organization, we like to see development like this, that there are benefits in the long run for the municipalities.
Yeah, excellent. Because this is also underlining the approach that we're having at the moment, the discussion on the local level, on the global level, to maximize those added value creation. But what
Exactly.
is the companies, can they also do something by themselves, like offering some, do they offer
It,
some sponsorship or whatever? Because that could be done on a voluntary basis as well.
they are, and there has more or less on a national level, all project developers has different name of the method, but the method is more or less the same. They are offering local benefit for local associations or local villages nearby. They are offering benefits for houses within, let's say, an area of 1-2 kilometers from the wind turbine. They are offering other benefits for the local area. So there is a package existing for wind farms being developed as of today. But for 10 to 15-year-old wind farms, there are no such existing in not in all wind farms, but the bigger wind farms, they might have some local municipality grounds, for example. But more or less today in the Swedish landscape, you need to offer a package if you're going to create wind power.
This is very, very interesting, and really quite interesting how the discussion takes place in different countries in a very similar way at the moment.
Yeah, I imagine.
Anyway, time is running as usual in this very interesting discussion. You've already mentioned about nuclear energy, this discussion, which is not really helpful because it's something, if and in theory, for someone in the future. So we better go for renewables. Now, without doubt, I think we can say Sweden can cover all its energy needs from domestic renewables.
Yeah,
Do you think
definitely.
that will happen? And if so, when could it happen?
I don't think it will happen though, because I think what we have, the benefit for Sweden is to have a mix of different energy sources, and technology-wise, we would like to see a system where it doesn't matter which technology we implement in the system, but the most price efficient and, in my opinion, the most environmental efficient technology should be used. Looking at different studies for what's possible for the Swedish energy system, there is a study that has tested to have 100% renewable in Sweden, and it's possible to do so. And it's possible to do so with a mix of renewables, with a mix of hydrogen production, with a mix of e-methanol turbines, etc. You can create an energy system that is completely running on renewables. It's just a matter of specific incentives to do so. And as the government has stated, now the government has stated they're willing to spend a fortune on nuclear. So from the wind business and from the renewables business, we can clearly state that you can do it in this way instead, and it will not only be better for the environment, it will also be cheaper.
I think that is a good conclusion of this podcast about Sweden. It's a matter of what we want, and I think just important to present the strong arguments, and the arguments for wind power, for renewables are stronger today than ever before, not only environment, but also now the economics.
Yeah, definitely. And just to go back to the topic of who are the investors and who is operating wind power. I mean, right now it's a complete diversity of different enterprises, different actors here, and I think that has a huge benefit for the mix because we see investments in prolonging small scale hydropower, we see investments in purchasing an older wind farm, adding solar or battery capacity to that. So in the long term, we will have a more sustainable energy system. And in the long term, we will be able to have a completely renewable system if we decide to.
Well, Per Olofsson, that was very exciting, very interesting, very insightful. I thank you so much for your time, and I wish you, to all Swedish colleagues, all the best on the way to this renewable energy future.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you very much. Great talking to you.
With this, thank you to our audience for listening, and goodbye.